Serious. What's the scariest, creepiest incident you've seen, but no one believes you? When I was a kid, I had a nightmare that kept coming back again and again. In the dream, there was this creature, kind of like a lizard man. The strange thing about him was that he could see whatever I saw through my own eyes. I would run and hide somewhere, and for a moment I felt safe because he didn't know where I was. But the second I peeked out to check if the coast was clear, he'd instantly know my location. Then I'd have to run again, find another hiding spot, and the whole thing would repeat. Over and over. It was exhausting and terrifying, a true nightmare. But the creepiest part didn't happen in the dream. One day, I mentioned the lizard man to my dad. As soon as I started describing it, his face suddenly went pale. His voice started shaking when he asked me, "Did this dream happen at our house in East St. Paul, the one with the apartments behind it?" I was confused but said, "Yeah, that's where I always ran to hide." "How did you know that?" He paused for a moment and then said quietly, "Because I have the exact same dream." I don't know if it was the way he said it, or just the whole situation, but even now, thinking about that moment still gives me goosebumps. It was genuinely chilling. When I was about 8 years old, I was staying at my grandmother's house during the holidays. One afternoon, I went out for a walk around the neighborhood. The area had a hill that sloped down toward the sea. As I was walking, something shocking happened. A car suddenly came speeding down the hill at an incredible speed, flew off the edge, and plunged straight into the sea. I was terrified. I ran to the nearest house and told the people inside to call the police because a car had just gone into the water. They didn't believe me. They said they would call the police, but later I found out they never actually did. About a week later, news spread that someone in the area had gone missing. That's when I told my grandmother about what I had seen and exactly where it had happened. She immediately called the police. When they searched the area, they found the car in the water with the body still inside. It turned out the man had been dealing with serious problems and had driven off the hill intentionally. Still, I can't help but wonder, if that woman had believed me and called the police right away, maybe things could have turned out differently. A few years ago, I was moving out of an apartment where I had been living alone. I had spent about 5 days slowly packing and moving my belongings, and by the last day, there were only a few things left in the closet. While clearing it out, I noticed something strange behind an ironing board I never used. The wall inside the closet was badly damaged. A large chunk of drywall was missing, and pieces of it were scattered across the closet floor. My first thought was panic. I figured the damage might cost me my security deposit. Once I moved everything aside, I saw that the hole actually went down into the space below my apartment. I assumed it connected to the closet of the unit underneath mine. I immediately thought it must be mice or rats. I'd seen rodents chew through drywall before. To check, I grabbed a flashlight and leaned in to look down through the hole, expecting to see a nest or something moving around. Instead, I saw a small ladder. It was positioned directly under the hole, leading up into my closet. I froze. Quietly, I turned off the flashlight. There was faint light coming from the apartment below, and in that dim glow I saw a shadow move, like someone had been standing there and shifted when my light went out. Panic kicked in. I yanked the ladder out of the hole, tearing the wall up even more, and ran out of the apartment. I didn't stop until I reached a Denny's parking lot across the street, where I called the police. Right after I hung up, I looked toward my apartment window. For a moment, the blinds slowly parted, then closed again. The police arrived within minutes and arrested my downstairs neighbor. Apparently, he hadn't left his apartment in nearly 3 years. He had developed severe paranoid schizophrenia and had been secretly climbing into my apartment through the hole whenever I wasn't home. The most unsettling part is that I remembered hearing strange sounds coming from that closet long before I moved out. For nearly a year, I would sometimes hear crying or long, drawn-out wailing in the middle of the night. The sounds would start suddenly, then stop just as abruptly. I never understood where they were coming from. He was never charged with anything and was later placed in a halfway house, at least according to what I heard about 4 years ago. Edit. Since this got a lot of attention, here are a few more details. Every so often I would notice white or gray dust around the apartment. I assumed it was pieces of the stucco ceiling falling. Now it's obvious it was drywall dust from when he crawled through the hole. He must have cleaned up after himself because there was never a clear trail leading to the closet. One time I remember closing the blinds before leaving on a hot day to keep the apartment cool. When I came back later, they were open. I actually met this guy when I first moved in. He introduced himself outside and said he was my downstairs neighbor. I'm not sure how he knew which apartment I lived in. He told me he hoped we could become good friends. That was about a year before he stopped leaving his apartment. The police later showed me a photo taken the day they arrested him. He looked completely different, extremely thin, pale, and wild-eyed, like he had stopped eating. But when I first met him, he was just a normal-looking guy walking his dog. One night while I was still in college finishing my last day of work, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, was staying over at my parents' house. That night in my dorm, I was suddenly woken up by a loud knock on my door, the kind that instantly pulls you out of sleep. I got up and went to open it, but when I looked outside, there was no one there. I checked the time. It was exactly 3 a.m. I'm not really a superstitious person, but something about it seriously unsettled me. After that, I barely slept and spent the rest of the night half awake, listening for any other noises. The next day I drove home and saw my girlfriend. While we were talking, I casually mentioned the strange knocking, trying to laugh it off. But the moment I said it, she went completely still. Then she told me that during the night she had sleepwalked. She woke up standing in front of my bedroom door at my parents' house, confused about how she got there. And when she looked at the clock, it was 3 a.m. Even now, when we talk about it, neither of us can really explain it, and honestly, even we have trouble believing it happened. This isn't my story, but my uncle's, and I've never been able to imagine him making something like this up. He's a military veteran and now a politician, a very serious, no-nonsense kind of person. A few years ago, he told us about a dream he had one night. In the dream, he and my dad were kids again, playing together in a big open field. After a while, my dad started walking toward a nearby patch of woods. My uncle kept calling out to him, telling him to come back, but my dad just kept walking. He walked deeper and deeper into the trees until eventually he disappeared from sight. Right then, my uncle woke up to the sound of his phone ringing. It was my grandmother calling to tell him that my dad had passed away during the night. It might not be the creepiest story out there, but something about the timing and the dream has always stuck with me. Even now, it still messes with my head when I think about it. It wasn't scary at the time, But looking back on it now, it definitely was. I was about 6 years old, and my parents had taken me to visit my grandparents for Halloween. On the front porch, my grandparents had one of those ceramic jack-o'-lantern decorations sitting on a table with a small candle burning inside it. I was fascinated by it, so I stood at the front window watching it. After a few minutes, I noticed flames starting to come out of the pumpkin's eye sockets. I turned around and said, "The pumpkin's on fire." My parents laughed it off. "Oh, how cute. It's supposed to do that, honey." So I went back to watching. A little while later, the flames were about a foot tall. I turned around again. "The pumpkin's on fire." Now they sounded a little annoyed. "It's fine." I turned back to the window. The flames were even bigger, maybe 3 feet tall this time. I shouted, "The pumpkin is on fire." My mom finally got up to check. She looked out the window and immediately yelled, "Oh my God, it's on fire." By then the decoration had actually caught fire. The flames had scorched the front of the house, leaving a burn mark about 5 or 6 feet up the wall, and the roof above the porch ended up with a big black smoke stain. If they had ignored me much longer, the house might have actually caught fire. Moral of the story: sometimes it's a good idea to listen to your kids. I work at a funeral home, and a few nights each week I'm the one on call if someone passes away during the night and needs to be picked up outside of normal hours. The building itself isn't old or historic. It was built from scratch about 10 years ago. When I arrive after hours, I park the van in the garage, then walk through the refrigerator room and down a long L-shaped hallway that wraps around the chapel until I reach the door to the main office. The strange part happens during that walk. As I'm moving from the back of the building toward the office, it often sounds like there are 2 people quietly talking somewhere nearby. Not loud enough to make out words, just that muffled sound of voices you hear through a wall, where you know people are speaking but can't understand what they're saying. The weird thing is that it only happens at night, or when the funeral home has been empty for several hours. I've tried listening for it during the day, but I've never heard it then. It always puts me a little on edge. To make matters worse, the light switches are placed so that you have to walk the entire length of the dark hallway before you can turn the lights on. So every time I come in at night, I have to walk through a dark funeral home, listening to what sounds like quiet conversations coming from empty rooms. Not exactly the most comforting design choice. I actually told this story recently after not thinking about it for years. I have some legitimately scary stories, like the time a guy randomly rabbit punched me on the subway, but the one people always remember is what my friends now call the creepy clown incident. A few years ago, I was traveling to another branch of my agency for a conference. When I arrived, I checked in at the security desk like everyone else. Sitting on the desk was a framed photo. At first glance it looked normal, except the picture inside was of a creepy clown just staring straight at you. It definitely caught my attention, but I didn't think too much about it. The law enforcement staff at our agency are famous for pulling pranks, and it felt exactly like something they'd do to mess with people, especially employees visiting from another branch. So I just thought, okay, the guys here have the same sense of humor, and moved on with my day. Later that afternoon, our group was talking about the building's history, the architecture, the artwork, things like that. We're historians, librarians, and archivists, so that kind of discussion is basically our favorite hobby. At one point I laughed and said, "Yeah, the artwork here is incredible. except for that creepy clown photo at the security desk. The room went completely silent. Everyone just stared at me. Finally, someone said, "What creepy clown photo?" I was confused. "The one at the front desk when you check in." "You guys didn't see it?" Everyone shook their heads. Someone said, "No, but we're definitely going to go look now." So we all rushed back to the entrance. The security desk was already closed for the day, but the picture frame was still sitting there. I pointed at it and said, "There, that's the one." Everyone gathered around the desk. Except it wasn't a clown. It was a signed photograph of the agency chief. To this day, 4 years later, everyone still teases me about the time I supposedly hallucinated a creepy clown picture. But I swear, when I checked in that morning, that photo was definitely a clown. One night, I stayed over at my grandma's house because my parents were attending a reunion about 3 hours away. They decided to stay in a hotel rather than drive back and leave me alone. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up and saw a woman standing at the end of the couch, just staring at me. I froze, completely mortified. I couldn't move or speak. We just stared at each other. Then, right in front of my eyes, she disappeared. It felt like hours, though in reality, it was probably only 10 minutes at most. To this day, nobody believes me. They all assume I was dreaming. But I wasn't. I was completely awake. I have this habit of staying at secluded cabins alone. I love it, even though it can get pretty creepy. A few months ago, my 2 closest friends and I rented an Airbnb out in the middle of nowhere. We spent the weekend taking edibles and reliving old college jokes. In the middle of the night, I wandered down to the bathroom. The cabin was an old, renovated A-frame, so the bathroom was tucked in the back. There was a tiny rectangular window directly across from the toilet. I flicked on the light, started to pee, and then I heard it. 4 distinct knocks on the outside of the window. Not random, it was a rhythmic pattern, dum-da-da-dum. There was zero light outside, so I couldn't see anything. But with the bathroom light on, anyone outside could see everything inside. I froze. Then, very carefully, I backed up and walked back to the loft. Neither of my friends believed me. Honestly, I'm still not entirely sure I do either. I used to work as a pharmacist in a hospital, and one night while on shift, I went to grab dinner from the cafeteria around 8 p.m. The cafeteria was in a different building from the pharmacy, and since we were in a developing country, electricity wasn't always reliable. At night, if the power went out, they'd switch on a generator, but to save fuel, not all the walkways were lit. The walkways were raised about 1.5 feet off the ground. As I was walking along one of them, out of nowhere, a small goat jumped up onto the walkway and started charging straight at me. It was dark, and I was terrified. If I ran back toward the pharmacy, I risked falling off the walkway. Plus, I was the only one on shift, so there was no one to help. I tried stepping to the side, but the goat followed me. I tried shooing it, even kicking toward it, but it didn't back down. Eventually, I managed to get past it and ran all the way to the cafeteria, the goat still on my heels. As soon as I reached the doorway, I looked back, and it was gone. I got my food, still shaking, and was terrified to walk back, but I never saw the goat again. I never really told anyone about it because I was worried they'd think I was crazy. My grandfather passed away before I was born. When I was around 10 or 11, I went to the bathroom to do my business. Afterward, I stood at the sink to wash my hands, but I didn't bother turning on the lights since I was only going to be there for a moment. The toilet is in a separate little room right next to the main bathroom. There's a skylight in the bathroom, so there was still enough light to see clearly. I washed my hands and then looked up at the mirror and didn't see myself. Instead, staring back at me was an old man with a thick mustache. I just froze and stared at him for what felt like a full minute. My heart was racing, but I wasn't really scared. The man's face was familiar, almost friendly. He looked at me almost endearingly. After about a minute, I bolted out of the bathroom and back into the living room where my family was. I never told them what I saw, but I did tell my best friend at the time, and he actually believed me. At the time, I wasn't sure who I had seen. A few weeks later, we were going through old photo albums, and I saw a picture of my grandfather, and I knew instantly that he was the man in the mirror. When I was younger, my mom was really into psychic stuff. Around the time I was 6, she had a psychic visit our house. The psychic told my mom she could sense a spirit following me, but that it was protecting me. I still don't know if I fully believe in ghosts, but I remember that experience vividly, even now. I usually miss these threads, but I've had 2 genuinely creepy experiences, one from when I was really young and another in high school. The first one happened when my mom went to Thailand for a month, so it was just me and my dad at home. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual and stayed in bed playing on my phone. I was lying on my side in the fetal position, facing the wall. Eventually, I got tired of lying on my right side and sat up, still looking at my phone. That's when I looked up and saw a figure standing within the curtains. It was huge, maybe 2 meters from the floor to the top of the curtain. The curtain draped over him, but I could make out broad shoulders and a solid head outline. He was looking out the window. Within 5 seconds, as my fear skyrocketed, the curtain collapsed in his place. There was no wind, no draft under the door, and the door was locked. A similar thing happened a few years earlier. My mom had called me to fetch my dad for dinner. When I went in, I saw the same figure standing within the curtains. This time, the windows were wide open, and a strong breeze was blowing through the room, yet the figure stood there, somehow holding the curtains down. I thought it was my dad, so I went up and told him it was time to eat. That's when it got really sinister. The figure turned to look at me, then slowly turned its head back to stare out the window, completely silent. My heart was racing. Then I heard water splashing in the bathroom and assumed my dad was taking a shower. I called for him, nothing. Fear completely overtook me, and I bolted back to the dining room. It was the same figure both times. I've never seen it again, but I can't forget those experiences. I'm not usually one to believe in the paranormal, but those moments, I still can't explain them. I have sleep paralysis, and it happens almost every night. The most memorable experience was when my grandmother gave me a weighted blanket, hoping it would help me sleep. That night, I fell asleep easily, but what happened next is burned into my memory. I remember waking up, or at least thinking I did. There was a figure next to my bed, and another one standing by my dresser. My dad's urn was on the dresser. The figure pointed at it and said, "It's Adam," my dad's name. I started to cry. The figure by my bed told me, "Get out." I tried moving my fingers and toes, but my body felt completely frozen. I tried to ignore them and focused all my attention on a picture of my dad on the wall. I stared into his eyes, willing myself to stay calm, and eventually the figures disappeared. The next morning, I woke up for real. Both my dad's urn and his picture were lying on the floor of my bedroom. I was 8 when my grandma passed away. We used to share a bedroom, and I was the one who would try to wake her up in the mornings. A few months later, something happened that I still remember vividly. My parents were at work, and my brothers were at school, so I was home alone. I was downstairs in the family room watching TV when I suddenly heard loud, heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. I didn't look back. Then I heard all the kitchen cabinets and drawers opening and slamming shut at the same time. Still, I didn't turn around. I just bolted out of the house and waited on the driveway for my brother to come home from school. Even now, I can't help but think it was my grandma. Every year on the anniversary of her death, a strange smell would fill the house, a mix of perfume, candles, and flowers, almost like a funeral home. The scent would move around the house. It could be heavy in one spot, and just a couple of steps away, you wouldn't smell it at all. My dogs would whine and cry whenever I noticed it. We didn't have any candles or air fresheners, and honestly, the house usually smelled like dogs. But no one else seemed to notice the scent. For context, my school was year-round. We'd go for about 3 months and then get a month off. Summer break was still 2 months, though. I'm guessing my parents couldn't afford a babysitter after my grandma died. My mom left for work around 1:30 p.m., and my oldest brother was the first to come home from school at 3:30 p.m., so during those 2 hours, I was usually alone, just watching TV or a movie. When I was about 12, my brother, 10 at the time, and I moved into a new house. The basement had a crawl space that still had some stuff in it. One day, we found an old-school lawn dart set, the kind that had been banned for being too dangerous. We set it up and started playing. These darts were insane. No matter how weirdly you threw them, they almost always hit their target. My brother and I both ended up getting hurt more than once. My mom eventually threw them away. Fast forward a few years. I moved out at 19 and got my first place alone. I bought a couch from a thrift shop and had it for about a year. One day, while lying on that couch, I experienced what I think was sleep paralysis. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a pillow jump. I jumped up, ran to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. I was home alone. I calmed myself down and went back to the couch. The next thing I felt was a sharp prick from inside the couch. I jumped up and looked down. A spike from a lawn dart was sticking out of the couch's innards. I had to actually cut the couch open to get it out. It made absolutely no sense. When I was in college, I discovered an old, abandoned grain elevator just outside of town, a tall cement and brick structure that looked like a massive silo. I've always been fascinated by abandoned buildings, so after driving past it a few times, I convinced my girlfriend to check it out with me. Once we got inside, the layout was pretty easy to understand. The basement was tiny with just a dirt floor. The ground floor had a wide main hallway, with a narrow passage leading into the actual silo section. There was also a ladder, just rusty metal rings embedded in the cement, that went up about 30 feet to what looked like a small storage space at the top. There was no way I was climbing it. It looked incredibly unsafe. About 10 minutes into exploring, something happened that still haunts me. My girlfriend and I both heard heavy footsteps, loud, deliberate, like a large man in heavy boots walking across wood. But there was no wood floor, and nobody else was there. The sound was so real and so loud that we just stared at each other, silently asking, "You're hearing that too, right?" We bolted out of there as fast as we could. Even after leaving, we couldn't figure out where the footsteps had come from. The only possible explanation would be someone somehow climbing that dangerous ladder and walking around above us. It's probably the creepiest encounter of my life. When I was 18, my grandfather was dying of cancer. My sister was about 8 or 9 at the time, and I had just moved into my university dorm the week before. My mom called to tell me his condition had worsened and to be prepared. A few nights later, I woke up around 2 or 3 a.m., feeling freezing cold. My dorm window was wide open, and I lived on the 4th floor. I'd never opened that window, and as far as I knew, it was always locked. It made no sense. It was early September, still fairly warm outside, even at night. Around 5 a.m., my phone rang. It was my mom. She told me my grandfather had passed a few hours earlier. Then she mentioned something strange. My sister had woken up in the middle of the night, sleep-talking and pointing at her window, repeatedly saying, "Granddad, Granddad, Granddad." She assumed it was just a bad dream. I never told her about my window being wide open that night, but it freaked me out. I've told my brother about it, but he doesn't believe me. I'm not sure I fully believe in ghosts, but I've always liked to think that maybe my grandfather was saying goodbye. I've seen a man standing near our garage multiple times, always around midnight. It wasn't until years later that I found out someone had been murdered there. Of course, at the time, everyone thought I was lying or just trying to scare them. The day the Columbia Space Shuttle crashed, I saw something strange in the sky that looked like a shooting star, except it was the middle of the day with a bright blue sky, and I live on the other side of the world. I have no idea what it was, and no one believes me. I was hiking on location.Then with my sister, and we were running behind schedule because of a few setbacks. We were heading down as it was getting dark, early autumn in Maine, so the weather was foggy and rainy. We brought walkie-talkies to check in with our grandparents at the bottom once we got close, just to give them an ETA. Suddenly, one of the walkie-talkies screeched to life, and we started hearing voices. Children's voices. They were chatting and singing in what sounded like French, nursery rhyme style songs. Keep in mind, we were in the middle of nowhere, Maine, hundreds of miles from any kind of civilization, and this didn't sound like a radio broadcast or anything remotely normal. It went on for about 10 minutes, and then stopped just as suddenly as it started. We ran the last few miles down the mountain. The combination of the dark, gloomy woods and children's voices coming through the walkie-talkie was absolutely terrifying. To this day, we barely tell anyone about it because it sounds so unreal. Back in high school, my friends and I loved going on ghost hunts. Every other weekend, all year round, we'd head out looking for haunted places. We had a lot of fun, but one night gave us a memory I'll never forget. We'd heard about a supposedly haunted barn about 30 minutes outside our tiny town. The story went that a deranged farmer had shot his family and then hung himself, typical haunted place legend. That weekend, the 5 of us met in town around midnight, hopped in my mom's car, and headed out. We were joking, blasting music, and telling stories along the way. My friend led me down a gravel road lined with trees that blocked out the sky. Eventually, we saw the barn off to the right down a narrow, covered path. Across the street was an abandoned shack with a flimsy screen door. We parked and got out. One friend stayed in the car as a lookout. We crept toward the barn, laughing and chatting, until everything suddenly went quiet. We all stopped talking at once. Then we heard something moving in the bushes. Seconds later, a flock of crows erupted from the ground, circling in the air before flying straight toward the barn. We were spooked, but kept moving. Not even 10 steps later, the bushes rustled again, but this time, it wasn't crows. A tall, dark, skinny figure slowly rose from behind the bush. No face. No clothes. Just a solid, black shadow. Needless to say, we ran badly. I turned, tripped, and thought I was done for. Back in town, still shaking, we noticed something on my mom's car, a handprint under the back driver's side handle, outlined perfectly in mud. At first, we assumed it was mine from when I fell, but my hand was way too small. None of us matched the print. Yeah, that was some truly scary stuff. When I was around 10 or 11, I was in the Boy Scouts. One day, we went on a camping trip near a lake down the hill from our campsite. Naturally, a couple of friends and I decided to explore. We didn't realize how quickly it gets dark once the sun starts setting. By the time we noticed, we were sprinting back to camp. I kept tripping, falling behind in the growing darkness. I really needed glasses back then, so combined with the fading light, I was nearly blind. As I wandered in the general direction of the camp, I saw a figure about my age. They motioned toward the campsite. I started walking that way, and when I turned to say thanks, they were gone. I couldn't make out their features clearly, but I remember them looking unnaturally pale, paler than a human should. Strangely, I immediately felt at ease around them. I know it wasn't anyone from our group. They weren't wearing the scout uniforms we had on. A few weeks ago, I was at work in my little village shop. I was on the 6 a.m. shift. The shop opens at 7, and this happened around 8:30 a.m. I was at the end of an aisle, stacking bread, when I suddenly felt a presence behind me. Thinking I might be in someone's way, I started walking up the aisle toward the checkout, pretending I had other business. About halfway up, I glanced back and saw a figure near the bread, so I kept walking. When I reached the checkout, I checked the CCTV. The cameras cover the entire store, only to realize the shop was completely empty. From the bread aisle to the checkout, there was no way anyone could have left without me seeing them. It still creeps me out to think about, but no one at work believes me. I saw a guy get kidnapped by a white van, and it all happened so fast. I was driving through the city center around 9:40 p.m. on a Saturday night, just normal traffic, when I noticed a guy on his phone looking nervous. About a minute later, a white van pulled up to his side of the street. Two men jumped out, grabbed him, and forcibly shoved him into the van, which then turned down a side street. This was about 4 years ago, and to this day, I still have no idea exactly what I witnessed. I remember going on scout camps as a kid. We were about 12 years old and stayed in large tents that slept 8 kids each. I was sleeping near the tent door one night when I felt a hand brush over my leg. The hand was coming from outside the tent. Startled, I sat upright, and I could hear someone moving away. I guess my reaction scared them off. The next morning, several other kids said they'd felt or seen a hand under the door or noticed someone moving around outside. The camp leaders just laughed it off, saying we were imagining things. Even now, it still terrifies me to think that a stranger was touching children in their tents. I'll never know what they were after. This happened recently, and I still can't make sense of it. I was ordering pizza from Pizza Hut. There are two in my town, and I made sure to call the one closest to my house for pickup. When I got there, the girl at the counter said they had no order for me. I explained that I'd called it in, and both her and her coworker looked confused. They were the only ones working the phones. I even showed her my call history, and she confirmed it was their store's number. Here's the weird part. The woman who supposedly took my order had a strong Asian accent, and no Asians worked at that Pizza Hut. We were all baffled. In the end, I placed my order in person and had about 20 minutes to kill while they made it. I decided to swing by a convenience store for some sodas. As I was driving, I saw a huge, pure white dog walking along the street. It looked well cared for but was limping, so I tried to catch it before it got hit by a car. The dog kept running every time I called from the car, but I circled the block, committed to helping it. Then, I saw a woman running down a side street. Somehow I just knew she was the dog's owner. I pulled over and yelled for her to hop in, and we took off, chasing the dog for about 10 minutes. The dog was her baby. Her sister had been watching it, and something had gone wrong. Her brother was also helping, calling in directions about where the dog was running next. Every time it darted across the busy streets, my heart sank. Eventually, we managed to corral the dog near the convenience store, just as her brother arrived. The woman burst into tears of relief, hugging me. I was tearing up too. It felt like a sudden, perfect bond between strangers. The strange part? I would never have been there at that exact time if it weren't for the Pizza Hut mix-up. There's no way I misdialed. I'd confirmed the store with the woman who wasn't even supposed to be there. It felt like another universe collided with mine just long enough to put me in the right place to help someone. Meanwhile, in that other universe, the Pizza Hut probably wondered why no one ever came for that order. About a year ago, I was working the night shift in IT support, just settling in when my phone rang around 11:30 p.m. It was unusual for her to call so late, instead of just texting. I answered to hear her frantic voice. "You need to get home. Chloe saw someone at the back door. There's a man at the back door." In the background, I could hear Chloe, my then 5-year-old, muffled under the bed covers, shouting, "Get Dad! Get Dad! Help Daddy!" Earlier, Chloe had gotten up asking for water, and my wife had told her to get a drink from the kitchen. Our French doors open onto the back garden, and it was too dark for Chloe to reach the light, so the only illumination came from the living room. My wife ran to Chloe's bedroom when she heard her screaming, and Chloe told her, "There's a man at the door, Mom. There's a man at the window, and he has no face." I bolted from my desk, telling my boss I had to leave immediately. There was someone trying to get into my house. When I got home, Chloe was still hysterical but clung to me tighter than ever. This wasn't typical fear of the dark or childish imagination. It was pure terror. I grabbed a hammer and a torch and went out into the garden. It had been raining heavily, so I couldn't see any footprints, but the rear gate was swinging open. When I asked Chloe what she had seen, she described a man facing away from the door, looking toward the back of the garden, who then turned to look at her through the window, but he had no face. I saw a casket floating inside our room. I was terrified, but my mom nearly hit me because she thought I was making it up. A few days later, a family member passed away. I was traveling in Japan this summer, and while in Kyoto, I visited an antique store. Kyoto is an ancient city, so you can find some incredibly old and unusual trinkets there. I bought a Hanya mask, look it up, which in Japanese folklore represents the demon of a scorned woman. There are 3 variations of the mask, with dark red signifying pure evil. The one I bought was dark red. I traveled to Osaka with the mask in my bag and placed it on the desk in my hotel room. That night, I had a truly terrifying experience. It was like lucid dreaming. I kept waking up and being aware of my surroundings, yet I was still trapped in a dream. My recently repaired phone was broken again. When I checked the map on it, it kept showing a destination back in Kyoto that I didn't recognize. Then, I got a call from a number that wasn't a real phone number, an endless sequence of digits. When I answered, a voice screamed at me from the other end. The horrible feeling lingered for almost 3 days. I eventually got rid of the mask. I'm not superstitious, but I'm convinced that some kind of malevolent spirit was attached to it. In my early 20s, I worked as a security guard at a local cemetery. At first, the novelty of working among gravestones was intriguing, but after a couple of weeks, the thrill wore off. Most of the time, when alarms went off after hours, I was more annoyed than scared. Usually teens or homeless people wandering through, sometimes vandalizing the grounds. Graves, mausoleums, and crypts aren't cheap. Seeing them disrespected would make me furious. This cemetery is about 250 years old, on the East Coast, surrounded by dense woods, hills, and valleys. The paths wind through old family plots, and the trees are tall and mature, creating long shadows at night. Deer often trip the motion sensors, sometimes branches, and occasionally kids would be out after dark. One hot July night, around 4 a.m., an alarm went off near an area close to a local university. I assumed it was kids again. I grabbed my flashlight, turned the cart around, and parked a few paths away so I could approach quietly. I knew this cemetery like the back of my hand, including all the hidden clearings and nooks. I rounded a corner near the Johnston family mausoleum and looked into a small clearing where I expected them to be. Nothing. Just the trees and shadows. I moved closer, flashlight sweeping, still nothing. I paused at the steps of the mausoleum to steady myself, hand on a pillar. Then I looked back into the clearing. There it was. I can't fully describe it, just a black shape, the darkest black I've ever seen, moving through the clearing. It wasn't a shadow of a tree, and it wasn't a person. It exuded pure dread, a feeling like, yes, this is how you die. And then it started moving toward me. I bolted back to the cart, my heart hammering. As I turned the key, the headlights came on, but the light didn't touch the figure. Everything around it was illuminated, the grass, the trees, the stones, but the shape remained a perfect, moving void. A black hole in the clearing. I didn't stop until I reached the lit, modern part of the cemetery near the admin building. Once there, I looked back, nothing. No black shape, no creeping dread. Just the adrenaline left behind. After that, I refused to check that area again at night. I told my director about it a few days later. She laughed and said, "Oh yeah, people have been seeing that for years. We call it the shade." She hadn't seen it herself, but it was a known phenomenon in that section. I've never returned to that part of the cemetery up close. Sometimes I drive past during the day, glancing at the clearing from a distance, but I never, ever get close. I don't want to. My wife and I had been married for only a couple of months, living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. One night, I got up to use the bathroom. It was just about 8 feet from our bed. Half asleep, standing at the toilet, I suddenly got the most intense, bone-chilling feeling. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I snapped fully awake and instinctively looked behind me. My wife was asleep, exactly where she should be. I shook it off, thinking maybe it was just a weird middle-of-the-night spook, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, my wife told me about one of the scariest dreams she'd ever had. In her dream, there had been a demon in our bedroom, silently watching her while she slept. I froze. I told her about the feeling I'd had. At that moment, it hit me, whatever was in that room that night, it wasn't just a dream. I went to college in rural Pennsylvania, basically a state school in the middle of nowhere. All our dorms sat at the top of a hill, and behind them stretched woods that went on for a long way, ending at a road and a small graveyard. We'd sometimes sneak back into those woods to hang out and drink, definitely not doing any drugs. One night, I was heading back to our usual hangout spot. Out of nowhere, I heard the unmistakable crunch of branches underfoot. Panic hit me. I thought it was campus police coming for us, so I dove behind a tree. A few moments later, down the trail, a man appeared. Older, with a massive, bushy beard. He was carrying a tree-cutting axe, a long knife strapped to his belt, and dragging a sled behind him. On that sled, something that looked suspiciously like a deer. I didn't stick around to find out. I bolted to a nearby river to clean myself up before heading back to the dorm. After that night, I never set foot in those woods again. Of course, everyone else thought I was just making it up to seem uncool, but I know exactly what I saw. My family's house sits right next to a parking lot in an abandoned house that's known for drug activity. People walking up to peek in the windows isn't uncommon, but the scariest encounter happened earlier this year. It was around 2 a.m., and I went to the kitchen to grab a snack. As I passed the bathroom, I saw someone inside, rifling through the medicine cabinet. The room was barely lit by the motion-activated light from outside. My heart sank. I knew the only people living in the house were my grandmother, my mom, and me. None of us are taller than 5'1", but this person was easily a foot taller than me. I bolted upstairs and shook my mom awake, yelling that someone had broken in. She groggily protested, insisting it was probably nothing and that I should just let her go back to sleep. After a couple of minutes of panicking and trying to convince her, she finally got up and went to check the bathroom and found nothing. Later that week, she asked if I'd left the downstairs windows open. They wouldn't lock properly, but even then, she still didn't believe me, saying I probably mistook someone outside for a person inside the house. I live in a house built in 1945. There's nothing inherently creepy about it, just an old, quiet home. But occasionally, and completely irregularly, I catch a glimpse of a woman in a wedding dress reflected in one of my windows. She never moves, never does anything, just appears for a moment and then vanishes. It always spooks me, even though she's never done anything threatening. While visiting my grandmother in Philadelphia, my family went out exploring, and we decided to head to Franklin Mills. I was a little kid and exhausted, so I begged my parents to let me stay in the van. They finally agreed. My dad locked the doors and took the keys with him. I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to a man frantically trying to get into the sliding door of the van. Our eyes met, and he just stared at me for what felt like forever. Then he walked around the van, trying all the doors before finally wandering off. Once he was a good 100 yards away, I unlocked the door and bolted into the store, desperately searching for my parents. Looking back, that was incredibly risky, but I somehow made it. I always got the sense that my parents didn't fully believe me, or maybe they were just racked with guilt for leaving me there in the first place. Either way, it remains one of the scariest moments of my life. The thought of what might have happened if that door had been unlocked makes it one of the creepiest too. When I was about 14, I had a flip phone that was just sitting on the kitchen table while I was talking to my 8-year-old sister about the Bravest Warriors cartoon. My phone was across from me. I wasn't touching it, using it, or on a call. Suddenly, it buzzed with a voicemail notification. Strange, because my phone hadn't rung, so I hadn't missed a call. Curious, I checked the voicemail. What I heard made my blood run cold, a 2-second snippet of our conversation from just a few minutes earlier. I clearly heard my voice saying, just like when impossible, and then, for a half second, a god-awful screeching noise before the message ended. I played it for my sister, and she confirmed it was definitely my voice. 14-year-old me was terrified and deleted the message immediately. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have. Now, neither my sister nor I get believed when we tell this story. When I was in elementary school, they held a bingo night once a year. In 4th grade, I went with my friends, but had to step away for a moment to use the bathroom. To get there from the gym, you had to walk past this door that was almost entirely glass. As I walked by, I thought I saw someone standing outside. Being a curious and admittedly stupid kid, I stopped, checked the bathroom, and then walked over to open the door. At first, I thought there was nobody there. But the moment I closed the door behind me, something bolted out of the bush next to it and ran. To this day, I still have no idea what it was. I'm a 5 feet 10 inches, medium-built guy, and I've been in some genuinely scary situations, but nothing compares to this. One day, I was walking down Division Street in Portland, Oregon. It was the middle of the day, a fairly busy street, and that's when I saw her, a tiny girl, maybe 14 or 15, barely 5 feet tall, and about 80 pounds. Her hair was black, long bangs covering half her face. She had this mix of goth and slightly tweaker vibes, not wasted, just unsettling. She was just standing there at the bus stop. As I walked by, our eyes met. And in that instant, this little girl, half my size, gave me a look that froze me in place. I can't describe it any other way. I felt like a tiny, helpless fly, and she was a giant, hungry spider ready to devour me. That was the exact image in my head. I literally stepped off the sidewalk, nearly into traffic, just to avoid passing within a few feet of her. Even now, thinking back on it still sends chills down my spine. I was leaving a friend's apartment late at night. As I got in my car, I glanced up at the stars and caught sight of something strange streaking across the sky. At first, I thought it might be a plane. It was flying at about the height and speed of a standard airplane, but the shape was completely wrong. Its main body was a round ball, with a flat disc on either side. A steady green light glowed from it, and for a split second, it looked almost exactly like a TIE fighter from Star Wars. My first thought was that it might be a satellite passing overhead. I even Googled what would be visible from my area that night, but nothing matched. To this day, I still have no idea what I saw. A few years after we buried my father, I saw him standing behind me, clear and unmistakable, as real as if he were alive. I just stared, frozen, knowing he couldn't possibly be there, yet the image was so lifelike. I looked away for a moment, then back, and he was gone. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits, so it left me completely puzzled. Later, I came across an article about phantom grief, where the mind can recreate the presence of a loved one to help process loss. Strange, but it made sense in a way. I've always found this strange. My grandmother, my father's mother, lived in Puerto Rico, and my parents and I were visiting for a wedding, my mom's brothers. Before heading to my cousin's house, where we were staying, we decided to stop by my grandmother's apartment. The entire visit, I had a terrible feeling. I even told my parents, but they dismissed it since I was only 14. That very night, she passed away in the hospital. Last winter, I was sitting alone in our hot tub when I heard an extremely strange sound, one I can't even describe. I looked up and saw a disc-shaped craft hovering in the sky. It just stayed there for a moment, then slowly drifted away. I swear on my life, I'm not lying. I have no idea what it was. It's the scariest thing I've ever seen. When I was about 17, I was dating a girl who struggled with severe depression. I stayed, thinking I could help her, which, looking back, was a terrible idea, but I truly did love her. One night, I was at her house. It was late, and we were just lying in her bed, half talking, half dozing off. She fell asleep, and I lay there, drifting in and out, when an awful, creeping sense of dread washed over me. I rolled over and swear I saw someone standing in her doorway, just a dark silhouette. My heart raced, and I woke her up to tell her. She simply said, "Yeah, that's happened before multiple times." Her words did nothing to calm me. I got up and crept down to the living room. Her bedroom was up a narrow, creepy staircase, and a feeling of darkness followed me. I told her I wanted to leave and that she should come with me. Before she could answer, we both heard a voice coming from her basement. I wasn't taking any chances. I begged her to come with me, just to drive around and get out of the house. She gave me this look, cold and unrelenting, and said, "No. I deserve this. You need to go." Normally, I would have argued, but I didn't. I just left. Later that night, I was bombarded with hateful texts from her. She said she had hurt herself, blaming me for leaving her alone. But by the next day, she was fine again. We never spoke about that night again, and our relationship ended soon after, which, in hindsight, was for the best. I've only ever told one friend about this. I'm not sure he fully believed me, but it felt good to get it off my chest. That night is burned into my memory, a mixture of fear, dread, and helplessness I wish I could forget. Last year, I was visiting my mother in the hospital. It had been a rough day for her, so I stayed late, and I was waiting for the elevator on the 5th floor when something strange happened. Two men in sharp, expensive suits wheeled in a guy handcuffed to a wheelchair. He was an absolute mess, sobbing, gasping, and I could have been mistaken in the moment, but I swear I heard him crying, "Please don't. I'll be good. I'll be good." The men seemed a little on edge about me being there and kept a short distance away. When the elevator arrived, one of them said, "Very sorry, but we need this one. Please wait for the next," and they rolled him in. Now, that by itself wasn't unusual. The hospital is literally across the street from a prison, so seeing escorted patients happens from time to time. And if medical staff or someone with authority says they need the lift first, you just let them. No questions asked. What got me was the floor they went to. Out of curiosity, I watched the indicator tick down from 5, all the way past the basement levels. The next day, I asked the nurses, assuming maybe some kind of underground car park. They seemed certain the only thing below the hospital was industrial pipes and maintenance areas. So yeah, take from that what you will. Is my local hospital secretly running some kind of underground experiment on prisoners? Who knows, but it was definitely unsettling. When I was younger, my friends and I spent almost every weekend pulling all-nighters at my friend's house, drinking, blasting music, just being dumb kids. Occasionally, we'd wander onto the local golf course at night and play games like hide and seek. Yeah, badass, I know. One night, it was me and my then-girlfriend as the seekers, and the rest of the group, about 10 people, were hiding in clusters of 3 or 4. We also had one friend who liked to run off and jump out at people just for laughs. As we walked along the course, we emerged from a tree lean onto the green and froze. On the far side, there was a figure standing there. We immediately assumed it was our prankster friend and called out. The figure turned and started sprinting toward us. At first, we thought it was just him running up to scare us, but as it got closer, we realized it wasn't our friend. It was a man with long hair and a scraggly beard, looking homeless. He ran straight up to us and then passed, moving in this weird, unnatural way, kind of like that scene in Get Out with the gardener. He didn't stop. He ran past us, leapt over a fence, and disappeared into the night. The creepiest part? Our friends, hiding just 20 meters away, said they saw us standing there, heard us calling out, but didn't see anyone run past the way we described. Whatever that was, none of us could explain it. I used to live in an old duplex where I had the entire ground floor to myself. One day I was sitting at my computer with headphones on when I noticed a quick flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I took my headphones off and listened. A moment later, I heard the back door move. Then I thought I heard footsteps. A second later, another door closed somewhere in the shared common area. The strange thing was that if someone had gone anywhere else in the apartment, I would have seen them. The only other way out led through my bedroom and into the common area, and that's not a route anyone would normally take. You wouldn't usually walk through someone's bedroom just to leave. Something felt very wrong. I grabbed a knife and carefully checked the entire apartment. When I reached the back, I found the door slightly open. The door that led from my bedroom to the common area was also unlocked. That's when it hit me. The only way someone would know about that exit is if they had been inside my apartment before, probably when I wasn't home. After that day, I became extremely careful. I double-checked every lock in the apartment every day and eventually set up 2 webcams to watch the place while I was gone. Nothing unusual ever showed up on the recordings, except for my dog occasionally freaking out for no obvious reason. I used to work in a large office building, and every now and then I'd stay late or come in on weekends to do overtime. I actually preferred working at night because the building was empty, I could focus better, and I could play the radio as loud as I wanted. But something strange kept happening. About an hour or 2 after I arrived, I would start hearing loud bangs, like something heavy had fallen onto the floor. Then it would sound like whatever it was being dragged across the floor, all the way toward the other side of the building. Sometimes it even sounded like heavy footsteps moving along with it. At first I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was probably the air conditioning system or the building settling or something like that. I had never heard it during the day, though that might have been because the office was busy and full of noise. After it happened several times, I finally asked the facilities manager if he knew what it might be. He asked me to record the sound if I heard it again. So the next time I worked late, I recorded a short video when the noise started and emailed it to him. Later he told me he couldn't hear anything unusual in the recording. He even sat at my desk for a few hours one night to see if he could experience it himself, but he never heard the sounds either. In the end, he basically assumed I had misunderstood some normal building noise. Later I told the story to a few coworkers, joking about how the office might be haunted. I laughed it off, saying something like, "I mean, nobody's ever died here, right?" One of my coworkers paused and said, "Actually, someone did." Apparently, about 10 years earlier, a woman who worked for the company had a heart attack in the lobby. She had been helping a lost customer find the right office, and right after bringing them there, she clutched her chest and collapsed. While someone called 911, they moved her into the break room. There's even a small plaque in the neighboring lobby in her memory, something I had somehow never noticed before. After hearing that story, I stopped working overtime alone at night. I've got a grain elevator story of my own, classic dumb kid antics. Back then, we used to climb way up into abandoned grain silos just for fun. At the very top, there was a small concrete chamber with an amazing view of the city. Kids would hang out up there, smoke pot, and leave graffiti everywhere. One night, we were poking around up there. I was exploring the far end of the chamber with my flashlight, while 2 friends were over on the other side doing the same. The floor had some holes, but you could avoid them easily since most were tiny, and the city lights shone up through them. I carefully scanned the floor with my flashlight, made sure it seemed safe, and kept moving. I spent some time examining the cable trays and rusting lugs on the ceiling. Some had even formed these weird rust stalactites from rainwater seeping in from above. A friend came over to check something out and casually kicked a flat piece of dusty cardboard near me. That's when I saw it, a 2-foot wide hole in the floor, opening onto an 80-foot drop. That cardboard had been covering it the whole time, right where I'd been wandering around, staring at the ceiling like an idiot. One of my footprints in the dust was right on the edge. Just thinking about it now makes my stomach drop. I could have fallen to my death that night, and it was pure luck that I didn't. There's so much about life and reality that we don't understand. What we perceive as reality is only a tiny fraction of what actually exists. There are things we can't see or touch, like radiation, radio waves, or Wi-Fi, that are very real and affect our lives every day. Imagine going back 200 years, Using technology that we now take for granted might have gotten you burned at the stake. Our understanding is always evolving, and to think we'll ever have it all figured out is naive. We don't even fully understand ourselves, let alone what might happen when the energy of human life is released from its physical form. Life is a mystery. The only way to approach its answers is with an open mind, embracing possibility and perspective. One night, I drove up to my sister's house to drop off my nieces. It was pouring rain, and as I pulled into her driveway, my headlights briefly caught a man in coveralls standing beside their barn. I distinctly remember the coveralls and his hands. The moment my lights hit him, he stepped back behind the barn. I sat there in shock for a moment before running inside to tell my sister. We went out to check, but there was nothing, no one there. A few weeks later, she mentioned that years earlier, the neighbor's son had committed suicide. He had been a mechanic,